Welcome to the Air Raid Attack podcast. It's a Wednesday, November the 17th. If you're listening anytime within the week or in the near future, happy to have you along and wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, which is just a week away from tomorrow. But nonetheless, currently, I'm excited to have a special guest coming on to us. It's a special episode, and I look forward to having Brenda Tracy, the founder of Set the Expectation. Brenda, welcome to the podcast. How are you this evening?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm doing well. And again, a little technology and a little lack of time watching, but I'm doing well. And Brenda, first things first, kind of little tell us about yourself. And I know you founded the Set the Expectation. Tell us a little about that and how can listeners get involved with your wonderful organization.
Sure. That's a big question. Like that's a lot. Where do I begin? So I am a rape survivor and I came forward with my story in November 2014. It's been a while ago now. Um, but I was attacked in 1998 by 4 college football players, 2 who went to Oregon State. So, 16 years later, I come forward with my story. I kind of just in this very organic kind of way began traveling the country, speaking to football programs. Started at Nebraska, Baylor, Oklahoma, big programs, small programs, men's teams, women's teams, lots of athletes. I work mostly with men. I believe that men are the solution, and we can't just talk about them as the problem as it pertains to sexual violence. Um, but I've been welcomed by the sports, mainly the college community is where I work mostly. But welcomed there, done a lot of work around gender-based violence, um, founded the Set the Expectation nonprofit and campaign, which is basically a nonprofit where we focus on prevention of gender-based violence, sexual assault, domestic violence, that type of thing, and really with a focus on men and engaging and empowering and educating men to get involved as the solution. So, is that a good description? Is that enough?
I know. I was like, dang, Michael, that was a hey home run right there. No, I'm trying to, of course, it's a topic that in sports you see it a lot, and it's interesting you brought that up, and feel free to answer it if all that. And I'm kind of curious myself. Why is it, and what is it with the society that we live in? So much that we always say, and I'm gonna go. I'm a guy. People's like, well, you're trying to be. I'm playing the role because unfortunately, the man can be a solution. They can obviously fix it and help. Spread the word for it, which I'm all about. Because I believe it's a topic that not a lot of people, unfortunately, discuss. They don't. My personal opinion, I'm not speaking for the listeners out there. I'm not speaking on the behalf of Brenda or anybody. From my personal standpoint, I just believe that domestic abuse, sexual abuse is it's like water on the bridge. We're just going to brush it under the mat and move on. But why is it that, and feel free to answer, is a lot of people think that the man's apology, even though obviously we know if men happen to be the suspect, if you will, but when it comes to men, how can men be the solution, if you will? And part A, and then B is the society with the men. Why is it that we feel that the men are always I don't know the right word, always the issue, the problem, if you will?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you first why I believe that men are the solution.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is what I do when I'm in a football team room. I have like 120 guys in there, right?
Oh, yes.
And a lot of times I'm like the only woman in there. And I share my story, and I get to the point of the conversation where I say, I'm not here because I think you're the problem. after I've just told them about this horrific gang rape that happened by college football players and how I was, let down by every system that was supposed to protect me. I say to them, I'm not here because I think you're the problem. I'm here because I know that you're the solution. And then I tell them why. Number one, if women could end sexual violence by ourselves and do all the work and fix it, we would have already done it. We've been trying to do that. We obviously can't. If it was up to women, this would be fixed. I think any community disproportionately affected by sexual violence, if they could fix it, they would have already done it. It's not happening, right? So that's a fact. The other fact is that about 98% of all sexual violence is committed by men. Mm-hmm. Men are committing these crimes against other men and women and children and other humans. So it's normally a male perpetrator. Yep. The other thing is that while most sexual violence is committed by men, most men don't commit sexual violence. So the statistics vary, but for me, I use a kind of a 90-10 thing, where it's like 10% of our male population are committing these crimes, 90% are not. The problem within the 90% is that we have a lot of good guys, right, that aren't doing these things, but they're complicit in their silence. They're complicit in their inaction. And they're saying, I'm a good guy. I don't do this. Why? This is my problem. Well, it's your problem, because if women alone and communities that are affected the most can't stop it, the 10% aren't going to help. Who does that leave? Mm-hmm. It leaves the 90% of the good men, right? And so I challenge men to decide, like, who are you? Are you part of the 10%? Are you part of the 90%? Are you part of the solution? Are you part of the problem? If you're part of the solution, then what I need you to do is align yourselves with women like me, organizations, people doing the work. I need you to get educated. I need you to understand that this is a men's issue. Men need to start holding each other accountable. Men need to start having conversations. Let's talk about language. Let's talk about locker room talk. Let's talk about the constraints of manhood. Let's talk about, why as a woman do I live in a different world than men? Why can I not wear my headphones at night and go on a jog? Why am I tasked with making sure that I keep myself safe? Right? Why is the onus on me to keep myself safe and to prevent an assault from happening to me? But we're not having conversations amongst men where the perpetrators are about not offending. Right?
Absolutely.
And not only that, but what about like, you care about your mom and your sister, and you've placed them on a pedestal, and you think they deserve safety and respect in this world. But what about the next man's mother and sister? Like, you can't just care about your family. Right. What about everybody else? What about everybody else? Like, my sons think I deserve safety and respect in this world, but what they really need is for other men to think that. Mm-hmm. Because my sons can't be with me all the time. Right. And it's not even about protecting and being bouncers for the women in our lives. It's about creating communities where I don't have to worry about stepping out of my house and being assaulted.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And excuse me. And, it's sad, and you brought it, and you nailed the nail on the head, if you will, or nail in the coffin, however people want to word it. But you look at it, and it's simply, facts are facts. It doesn't matter. I know we live in a pretty decisive, country or whatever, not even politics, but a lot of people, well, that's not true. Well, that's true. We don't know. People want to go pitty patter, but when facts are facts, and I'm not, not going to bring politics into it, but so you look at the men part of it, and obviously, facts are facts. The men are the one majority, and sexually assaulting kids, sexually assaulting women, men, doesn't matter. Gender,
it doesn't. Yeah, doesn't sexual violence doesn't discriminate.
Exactly. Yeah,
but we do. But
absolutely.
We do,
right?
Because that's what you're saying, right? Sexual violence doesn't discriminate. Anybody can be a victim.
Yep.
But we discriminate all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, we look at it like, the facts are, well, gender, whites do this X amount of percentage, blacks and Hispanics and Italians and so on and so forth. I'm like, show me the facts. Like my dad always said growing up, facts are facts. Facts are facts. There's no, well, that's not true. Well, no, it's fact. It's true. But jokes aside, it's obviously not a joking matter, but you look at it, the men are the ones doing it. Is there women out there raping? Absolutely. Sexual assaulting? Yes. Do you see it as often? No, not
No.
really. I mean, in the news here, where I'm at, Oklahoma City, it's the men. The men are doing it. So you look at it, and I know probably my next question may not be enough proof, may not be a good enough question. I know for some probably like, well, that doesn't mean nothing, but I'm kind of curious. You look at it like we look at it growing up, and I grew up a pastor's kid. Do I live the life growing up? I did, and of course, then the fun began. But nonetheless, we're not perfect. But jokes aside, is it when you look at the people that could it be a issue to where there's a lot of social media? And I know just had a previous guest come on, we were talking about expectations, and when it comes to sexual assaulting, and I'm not, it doesn't matter who is doing it, is it a growing up issue? Is it a lack of parents investing in their let's say sons for that matter? Or can we kind of point fingers at, well, social media showing women in these kind of pictures and bikinis and so on and so forth, and MTV, we all know what cable network can do, and so on and so forth. And what I don't even say what attracts, because that just sounds really disturbing. What is it that we can do, from my standpoint, from everybody else's, from the listeners out there that has kids and so on and so forth, or has sons, what's the standpoint that obviously you want to raise them right, but after, like my dad says, after 18, I can't control, unfortunately, what you do and don't do. What is it that we're missing from a parent standpoint, that might help down the road, help those people do it? Or is it just one of these things that's just what their driven mission is? I know
Well,
it's
yeah, and I'm not an expert on
right,
offenders by any means, and so I don't know the inner workings of the brain of all offenders, but
right.
I do think that there's uh different issues we could address. Obviously, I think that we have to, in this day and age especially, talk about porn,
Mm-hmm.
and how that relates to healthy relationships, to consent, and to all that stuff, right? Because I think a lot of our kids are starting to look at porn around the age of 10. And if you look at the research on it, it does change things in their minds, and it changes boundaries and what they think sex is, and what consensual sex is, and what are healthy relationships are, and that kind of thing. So I think we do have to address that. But then the other thing too is just manhood in general. I think we need to address, right? I think that we socialize our boys and our girls very differently. And so there's a lot of constraints that are placed on our boys, right? Like, really, we raise a lot of our boys to not be anything like a girl and not to be anything gay.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times what that leaves you with is boys are allowed to show anger as an emotion, but not vulnerability. Don't cry, don't process your emotions. Um, we are told, boys are told, to be conquerors, right? Like, how many women can you sleep with? And it's all about how many women you can get. And no doesn't mean no, and keep trying, and all these things. So there's a lot of stuff, the way we socialize our young men, that we need to talk about too, right? Um, so I think that's a factor as well. And a lot of times it's a very divisive conversation, because people want to, when we use words like toxic masculinity and that kind of thing, and people, get upset. But masculinity in itself is not bad. But if it harms another person, then that's when it becomes toxic, and that's when it becomes harmful. There's nothing wrong with being a man.
Yep.
But it's what are the behaviors? How are you processing your emotions? How do you view women? Right? Do you view women as objects, things to conquer, things to dominate? Again, things, right? Are we bodies? Are we humans? Are we peers? Are we equals? What are we? And what are your views about sex too? Sexual assault is about power. It's about control. It's about humiliation. It's about degradation. And when I talk to teams, I talk to people all the time. Before we can abuse another human, we first have to dehumanize them. So if our young men are referring to women as sluts and hoes and this and that, they've already dehumanized this person. And that gives them permission to then abuse them, and gives them permission to excuse another person for abusing them, because we've dehumanized that person. We've taken away their value and their worth. And so they're not worthy of safety and respect and those other kinds of things. So there's a lot of things we have to address, for sure. But I think that issues of manhood are important, issues of consent, healthy relationships. I don't think we talk about that enough. I think if everybody knew what a healthy relationship was, they would know what an unhealthy relationship was.
Brendan, that's so true. You look at it, and first off, I applaud your campaign set the expectation, I think, and I follow along, and I'm getting more involved with it's the organization called Fight the New Drug, and practically it's
Yes.
phenomenal.
I know who they are. I really admire them.
If you listen out there, it's a non-religious, non-legislative, and anti-shame nonprofit organization that's raising awareness on the course of the harmful effects of porn and exploitation. And and it's sad that I know listening out there that you may be, and I'll be honest, and and I appreciate Brenda's honesty, and I'll be honest, I was addicted to porn for quite a while. I'm 33. I don't remember how old I was when I was in the 8th grade, but that tells you
Yeah.
it wasn't until my freshman year at Kentucky Christian University, a small town in Grayson, Kentucky, for anybody that doesn't know. In 2007, graduated high school in 06. So I've been around, but and I applaud FT&D for short, but and I like how they always, and I try to share on Twitter as much as possible when I'm on, but and we don't know what the expectations are, because and I agree with what they're saying as well, is you look at porn is practically not really brainwashing, but in a way it is, because you look at porn, and not to bring it all up, but it sets the expectations to what we think. Well, they're doing it, so it must be normal, so to speak.
Right.
They're not saying no, so I'm going to tell my wife or girlfriend or spouse or whatever the situation is, that they're not saying no, and you're not going to say no. It completely ruins love, first of all, completely ruins relationships, not just within your wife, husband, but friends, even just a view on women, because let's
Yeah.
be honest, and I'm sure it has a lot to take, but if I happen to look down the road, if I'm at, I don't care where I'm at, let's just say downtown Oklahoma City, I'm just throw it up, and here comes this, woman. Now you're thinking, oh well, I just got done watching the porn about 2 hours ago, and blah 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 blah. It's unfortunately, it ruins all kinds of. It just ruins your life in general. It's not just for listening out there. If you're addicted, my DM's open. I'll be glad to help you out, give you some resource. I don't know. I'm not a professional. I'm going to send you to Fight the New Drug or anywhere else that say, hey, they got better resources, because I'm just going to send you somewhere. But I can tell you, hey, it's not good for you. It's not fun.
Well, and especially when you're a child, right?
Exactly.
And children are watching this stuff. I had I was at a kind of it was like a college showcase of college athletes that were pro hopefuls. And I had a group of men. I did what we call a breakout session, and we kind of did just a deep dive on like false reports and some other topics. And at the end, I had a group of men that were standing around. We were talking, and I asked them 3 questions. The first one I asked them was, from your time in college, and they'd all been there for 4 or 5 years, what did you get from the consent training that you went through? And they all said, no means no. And I said, okay, has anyone ever talked to you about what a healthy relationship is? No. When did you first start watching porn? All of them said about 10 or 12 years old. And then I thought, and then we wonder why we have a problem, right? Because consent is not just no means no, right? It's got to be yes. It's got to be enthusiastic. It's not The fact that we don't know what a healthy relationship is, we don't know what a healthy sexual relationship is, and that we're watching porn, which is not real life, and a lot of it is violent,
Absolutely.
and a lot of it is sexual assault that's happening on there.
Yep.
From the age of 10 or 12, your brain's not even developed. I mean, of course we have issues in our society if that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. It's sad that we that we start, like you said, it's practically 10, it's practically 11 years old. I don't remember. It's sad, and then we get so used to it, and then
Desensitized
so exactly,
and
and
normalized.
it's
Yeah.
normal, yeah. And people talk, well, what's the new? We always, and it's what bugs me the most. And I'm not just saying it because you're on here, but I've always thought this. We look at it like COVID, for example. I know it's a touchy subject. It's not real. It's real. I don't care. We're not here to discuss if it's real or not real. I don't care. Um, we talk about the new normal. Well, if the new
Yeah.
normal was COVID, why can't we have a new normal to where porn's completely off the internet? Why can't we have a new normal that we can better equip younger kids, preferably middle school, but if it gets that elementary age, hey, go for it. But why can't we start young with kids, like men, and so on and so forth? The men out here, they might have cheated on their wives, which I don't condone, but they might have cheated on their wives. Life happens, and they need help. But now all of a sudden, oh, he's a heathen. Now we toss him to the curb, so to speak. And I just wish that we, instead of, and I get COVID's a serious matter, but instead of the new normal with COVID, why can't we just have a new normal to where we can continue to be who we are, but better equip our guys? And I just think it's a topic and a issue that just a lot of people ignore, because I think a lot of people are so used to it. It's like you said, it's normal.
Yeah. Well, and the way that we continue to perpetuate violent cultures where violence happens is by normalizing things. So when we see just like words like child prostitute,
Yep.
that's not a thing. That's not a thing. Yeah, a child cannot be a prostitute.
Exactly.
You cannot have sex with a minor.
Yep.
Right? That's rape. That's sexual assault. That's not a thing. But we see these words and these headlines, and what it does is it softens the act, and it makes it like normal and it's okay, right? Sex with a minor makes it sound like it's not really that bad, versus raped a child, right?
Yep.
So, and that's the way we continue to perpetuate, cultures that violence continues to happen. I will say though, as far as like men's health and that kind of thing, I've been really happy to see more athletes stepping forward, talking about their mental health, their personal stories, that kind of thing. And I hear a lot of personal stories when I go into rooms. I hear from a lot of men who are survivors, because they exist too. Like we said before, sexual violence doesn't discriminate. I think it's 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they're 18. But there's obviously a lot of stigma around talking about it. So I think that I've been happy to see more men stepping forward, in the public space to say, like, I'm not okay, and having people rally around them. And I think when one man does that, he gives permission to another man to be able to also share who he is and what he's gone through and what he needs. So I've been happy to see that lately.
I like that. And I was actually going to ask you that when you go to these universities or maybe high schools or wherever you're going, um, to sports team, not so much football, but maybe basketball, cross country,
Hmm.
doesn't
Yeah.
matter the sport. What's the reaction that you get? Is it overwhelming once you release your story? Um, what's the reaction? And obviously, it sounds like it's a good one. Obviously, then it sounds like it's more of a intervention, if you will, type of thing, or an opening door for maybe Mary Joe or Mary Sue or John Doe or who what have you. What's the reaction? The first impression, and then once the like they always say, the cat's out, and the well, the you let the cat out of the box, and so on and so forth. is the reaction, and obviously the reaction is really good. What's the most common, if I can write, there we go. What's the most common response that you get from these college athletes once, let's just say the meeting's over?
Oh, it's overwhelmingly positive. The the 90% of the men in the room that I talk about that, identify as the solution and all that, good guys, they definitely show up. And so a lot of times I have just a line of men waiting to thank me, give me a hug, um, take a photo with me. And I get a lot of, how can I help? What can I do? How can I get involved? Um, I want to be part of the organization. I want to do my part, that kind of thing. So it's overwhelmingly positive. I think by the time I leave, these young men realize, like, it's not enough that I don't commit sexual violence. What am I doing to prevent it? How am I part of a community that makes sure that perpetrators are not comfortable here? Right? Because perpetrators hunt where they're safe.
Mm-hmm.
Perpetrators hunt where they can get away with it. People like Larry Nassar do not happen in a vacuum.
Yep.
He had a whole community of people that enabled him to rack up 500 plus victims. So, how do we create communities where people like Larry Nassar are not comfortable and are not only that, but are held accountable and survivors are believed the first time they come forward, right? There's so many times we hear these stories. The wrestlers from Ohio State, who are all men. I think USC had a doctor. There was all kinds of stories all across the country where you hear about the third survivor that step forward, the fourth survivor step forward, and then there's hundreds after, and you're like, wow, what if we had believed the first and second survivor that reported? Then we could have not had all these other dozens of survivors after. So the response is overwhelmingly positive, and I think that is eye opening. I hear a lot of that, like, wow, you really opened my eyes to something bigger than me, right? Like something different, a world I
Absolutely.
had not thought of because I'm a man, right? And I
Mhm.
just go through the world as a man, and I don't realize that women don't live in the same world as men do.
Absolutely. And Adam, I know, kind of not continue with the thing is when you're out on the road, let's say for example, I know there's 52 weeks out of the year. How
Mhm.
often, how many weeks are you on the road spreading this organization out to across the country?
Well, prior to COVID and
Right.
the shutdown, I was probably close to the upwards of 300 days a year on the road. So it was a lot. For sure 250. Um, since COVID, however, I've decided to kind of not travel as much.
Mhm.
I think during COVID, I realized that I didn't understand how much the work was kind of wearing on my spirit and my soul,
Yes, ma'am.
and how sharing my story and my trauma over and over and over was becoming its own trauma. And so I've really had to kind of revisit this idea of self-care and what does that look like, and how can I do this work and also take care of myself, because this is a lot of emotional labor for me. And I benefit some from sharing my story, but at some point I've shared it enough that it's not really a benefit to me. It's a benefit to the people I work with. And so how do I take care of myself when I just am completely pouring out my cup like over
Absolutely.
and over and over, right? Um and some of that, I get filled back up by the people in the room, right? When people come up to me and thank me, and I hear survivor stories, and I see people getting involved, and I see the ripple effect of my work. That does fill me back up. So I get benefit from it too, but it's definitely a labor of love and passion for sure.
And I'm glad, I should say I'm glad, it sounds really bad, but it's interesting you brought that up. And, it's one thing, I even didn't think of until you brought that up. When you share your story over and over, and I know you're obviously using it to stop and prevent it from happening to other people and getting the
Yeah.
word out. To you personally, how mentally exhausting knowing that I know you're repeating yourself, but not, I don't want to get into any detail. So I'm not going that route. Obviously
Yeah.
keep it short, but does the PTSD, so to speak, does it replay in your mind that from the day that
Yeah.
took place?
Yeah. And that's one of the things I talk to people about trauma
Mm-hmm.
is if you understand trauma, then you understand that there's not really, for like normal memories and things that happen in our lives, if we have like a file cabinet, things kind of go in
Mm-hmm.
its place, right? And trauma isn't part of the normal file
Right.
cabinet. It doesn't have like a normal place where it just kind of disappears and you forget about it and it goes away. Like it changes you. It changes everything about you. And so I revisit that trauma and it feels the same every time. I think when I first started sharing my story, I thought, oh, this will get easier. I'll do it a couple more times. I won't cry. I won't feel it viscerally. Um, I'll get stronger and better at this. It'll get easier. And it never has. I can feel myself re-entering that apartment, describing what happened to
Mm-hmm.
me. It's almost like I can touch, see, feel, smell everything. And so it really is reliving it. And I've had to work really hard. When I share my story, I think about my feet a lot. Like, okay, your feet are on this stage.
Mm-hmm.
You're not in this apartment. This is where you are. You're recounting this. You're going to leave this apartment. You're fine. You're okay. You're safe.
Right.
um, but it's really hard. And not only that, but I'm literally getting up on a stage. I'm talking about a gang rape that I endured. I was in and out of consciousness for 6 hours. Um, is brutal, and it's embarrassing. It feels shameful. I'm sharing the worst moment of my life with a bunch of strangers.
Right.
So there's a lot of anxiety and fear, like getting up on that stage and being that vulnerable and saying the things that I say. Um, it's I feel like I step off a cliff almost every time I do it. So it's terrifying. But I do it, and it works, and I've seen a lot of good feedback, and the work I'm doing is good. And so I keep doing it, but again, I don't recommend it for other people. I certainly don't. I definitely think God has given me the grace and the strength to do what I do. Without that supernatural healing and power from God, I don't think I could. So I definitely don't recommend it to anybody else, but it's what I have chosen for myself.
Totally understandable, and and people don't realize. I'm sure. Excuse me. I'm sure just from your standpoint, and people, I think we look on the outside, it's like, yeah, she's telling a story, which is obviously nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I think we fail to acknowledge, yes, Brenda's telling her story. She's spreading the word. Hey, here's ways that we can end this. Here's way we can prevent this. Here's way of X, Y, and Z. But then at the same time, we look at it like we don't consider how mentally exhausting I'm sure it is. How
Yeah.
does it replay back in our mind, and then we get PTSD and so on and so forth. We always fail to acknowledge that. I hope she's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we. I
It
mean,
it
and it's
it,
funny,
it
but we
does.
we always feel that because like Brenda's telling the story, cool, cool. Well, that was really interesting. I'm really involved, and then we just move on with the life, and we don't realize, it takes guts, which obviously to continue to, uh, practically tell your story over and over and over. And I think at times we obviously, I do at times from not so much from you, but maybe from other TED talks I've watched or any other thing. We always think that was interesting. We always think we never think of the actual victim and
Right.
hope
Right.
she's okay. But when then, and I applaud her.
Right.
I'm sure it is unfortunately, mentally exhausting and
For you, just for you, think of the worst moment in your life, the most
mm,
disruptive, hurtful, harmful moment of your life that you don't want to tell anyone. It feels shameful. It feels horrible. You don't want to
mhm.
speak about it. You don't want to think about it. And then now tell me that story in detail
Oh man.
in a room full of strangers.
Oh boy. Obviously, I would.
That's how it is, right? Times 100.
I could, there's unfortunately, I grew up pastor's kid, not saying I did a very well job living it, but there's definitely stories, and yeah, unfortunately, I know you can't compare sexual assault to my grandfather's death, but no, and you're right though. I mean, and there's other
No,
stories.
but it's that kind of a thing, right?
Exactly
It's
right, exactly.
like bearing your soul,
Mhm.
like being so vulnerable in front of a bunch of strangers about something that you don't want to talk about, you don't want to deal with, you don't want to face. It feels horrible. It's, you know. So yeah, so that's kind of what it's like.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I know my stories, and I like how you asked that question. It's like, not so much put you in my shoes, but just tell your story in front of 120 roughly football players, 150 if you include probably coaching staff, or doesn't matter where you're at. You can be at, here in Oklahoma City. Hey, I want to put you in the middle of Oklahoma City. I'm gonna get you 18,000 people at the Paycom Center, and you on your own, buddy. You're gonna tell
Yeah.
your story.
Go up there with a
I'm
mic.
like, am I gonna do what? And so
Go inspire all those people.
exactly. Tell your
And get
worst.
them to want to change their lives. Go do it.
Yeah. And what's funny is, and it's fun, and we laugh because I imagine myself now. I'm visually seeing myself with the stories I'm telling, like, okay, but what's funny, but what's sad is, and it kind of relates to what we were talking about earlier, is porn. Pornography. People don't realize, porn will lead you to doing things you, like you said, you look back, oh man, I shouldn't have done that, and
Yeah.
you got a lot of regret. And so, porn does a lot of harm more than, it doesn't do any good. Let's put that out there for to begin with. Doesn't do any good. And I don't remember what pastor I was listening to, but he did a series on sex and marriage and relationships, and he practically said, in my own terms, I can't remember exactly how he quoted it, but put in layman's terms is, hey, you watched porn, felt good for roughly what, 3 minutes, and now you're back to being whatever kind of mood you were in. It just doesn't fill a void. But it's sad because a lot of people use that, and porn affects not just relationship, but it leads to men cheating on wives. It leads to so many other things. I can only I probably don't want to know, but only could imagine what else it may leads to. But and at the end of the day, it's just it's a sad, but unfortunately, it's the biggest, I think, addiction that a lot of people have, and it's just a tough one to battle.
Yeah, and we do need to talk about it more and the effects on our communities and our mental health and our lives. And I'm not any type of an expert
Right.
on the subject, but I'm glad that there's organizations out there that are doing the work.
Absolutely. And all the listeners out there, I can give you two, just because I know them not personally, but I do know them because I'm trying to work with the podcast. And just my personal, I'm not even worried about the podcast. Just me personally, Fight the Need Drug is the biggest one I'm really into. And then Covenant Eyes is a good way if you want to block any porn site, anything that's going to be harmful. Porn, it literally filters a lot out. And so, um can't prompt, it go, I don't get nothing off of it. I just want you guys to take care of yourself. But that's a few resources, if I can talk right, a few resources that's out there. And I know, definitely at the conclusion of this, in the podcast description, I'll definitely get the set the expectation link up, and feel free to really get involved if thing. And but going back, Brenda, when it comes to sexual assault for women, what what's the best, if there is such a thing, what's the best advice for for a horrible situation for a woman that she just got sexually assaulted, and what's the best advice that, from another survivor to another survivor, from survivor to survivor, that you give women that's been sexually assaulted?
Well, I think there's kind of two sides to this. I think that one is I want survivors to be able to go talk to someone,
Right.
but I need the people in their lives to understand how to respond to them. So I think I want to start there first. I think when a survivor comes to you, number one, we're coming to you because we think we can trust you. And if someone discloses to you that they've been sexually assaulted, number one, you have to understand you must be very special to that person. They must think a lot of you because we don't tell a lot of people what's happened to us. So they're disclosing to you. And what we need to do is tell the survivor, I believe you. You did nothing wrong. I'm here for you. I'm sorry that happened to you. You didn't deserve that. And just being a person that can say, like, I'm going to be here to support you. Whatever it is you decide that you want to do, I want to be here to support you. So if that's helping to find resources, if it's not, whatever the survivor wants. Because the most important thing we have to understand for survivors is that, again, sexual assault and rape are about power and control. And the survivor needs to have power and control about how they move forward. So whether that power and control involves them reporting or not reporting, we have to be okay with that. And I'm not talking about children, I'm talking about adults. Whether that is, I want to go through a Title IX process at school, I want to go to the police, I want to reach out for counseling, I don't want to do anything. Whatever that survivor needs in that moment in their journey, we need to be there to be supportive and let them know that they're not alone and that we believe them and support them. So that's really the most important thing, I think, for those of us around the survivor. And then I think for the survivor, I think for me, I just tell a lot of survivors the same thing. Like, it's not your fault. You did nothing wrong. There's nothing you can do to make another person decide to use their body to violate yours. It is never the victim's fault. That person decided to do that. And that, they're not alone, that it's okay to reach out for help. There are organizations, there are groups, there are people that will believe you, support you, be there for you, and that this is trauma. And you're at some point you're gonna have to deal with it. It's gonna affect your life, and you're gonna have to figure out how to deal with it and how to navigate it.
Absolutely. And we look at it and it's sad. And I don't know. I'm sure if I do, I doesn't cross my memory at the moment, but I don't know anybody personally that's been sexually assaulted. But
Oh, you do. They just haven't told you.
oh,
I
absolutely,
promise
I'm
you
sure.
do.
Well, I'm
They
totally
just haven't told
yeah.
you. We
And
all,
rightfully so. I mean,
the truth is we
yeah,
all know someone who has been sexually assaulted. They just have not told us.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And you look at COVID 2020. Forget COVID, just 2020 in general. It was a tough one for everybody from any kind of aspect of life. For me, I know you can't compare it, but for my thing, my dad being in a major stroke, nearly passing away. You couldn't see him for the 2 or 3 weeks. He was in the hospital. We all had certain um, things happen in our life during that 2020, what seemed to be the longest year of our lives. Um, but in this aspect, particularly, and it's scary because it's with all the restrictions that came out, with all the 6 foot rule, the mask rule, the whatever, don't touch, don't hug, don't do whatever we could potentially, because nobody knew what COVID was about at the time. But for a woman, and I always aim for women, but they're the majority, 99% of the time, they're the majority of the victim. For the woman that's in the physical, sexual, domestic relationship, if you will, what are ways, and even currently, I know in a lot of cities there's still shutdowns and so on and so forth. I know there's hand signals that's now being spread the word on TikToks and the Instagrams and a lot of other social media. I know I haven't seen a person on Twitter yet, but hopefully we can get that out there. But what are ways for women in particular to somehow let someone know, hey, I need out because you can't see, but my face is behind a mask, or I can't get close to you now because it's a 6 foot rule, so on and so forth. Uh, what are certain ways that they can try to give us hints like, hey, I need help, or can you help me type of way?
I think there's different, programs, and it depends on the cities, but I know there was some safe haven stuff that was going on across the country where there was like certain like signage on restaurants and stores and um hairstylists. Sometimes victims, the only time they're alone is at the hairstylist. Different programs like that that survivors have been made aware of. I know that I do recall seeing something about a hand sign like on a Zoom call type thing. Because the truth of the matter is a lot of survivors were trapped at home with their abusers.
Correct.
And so we also didn't have children going to school. So a lot of reports about child abuse went down because we didn't have to have our children in schools and that kind of thing. So I think one of the things that the organization called No More does as well is just also getting all of us to pay attention more, right, to our surroundings and to people around us. And if you hear something, call for help, that kind of thing. If you live in an apartment building, stuff like that. So there's different things that it all varies. And I wish I could say like there's one thing, but there's not. I know that um at one point there was a way to call for food delivery that
Mhm.
tipped people off, that kind of thing. Um, but I think some of it is just really being aware of who's in our circles and are we checking in on each other? Are we checking in on our neighbors? Are we aware of what's going on in our building or at our job or whoever's on the Zoom call? That kind of thing. Checking in with people, I think, is important.
I like that. And, I think we forget, I know a lot of times, and that especially last year, and it's still going on this year. I mean, especially in, cities in countries that's still on lockdowns and curfews and so on and so forth. But ways to get out, I'm sure, were tougher, and listeners out there, any way out, obviously get the help, get, whatever you can run, get the help necessary. Obviously, get out first of all. You look at this as a scenario, and I know
Well,
we're
can I just interrupt?
absolutely.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
I think, yeah, I think we have to be careful when we say just get out. I think when we talk about domestic violence situations, the point in time when the survivor tries to leave the situation is the most dangerous time for them. And so the fatality rate skyrockets. So it's important for our survivors to know where to go. But a lot of times there's kind of a planning thing that happens too for survivors so that they have a plan of how to get out, where to go, where they're going to be. But this is also why it's really important for all of our communities and everyone in our country to be helping fund these agencies that are doing the work with survivors. They need money so that we can help with safety planning. We can help with people leaving and that kind of thing. Because that is the most dangerous time for a survivor is when they decide to leave.
That's a good point. I definitely, I know, definitely didn't think about that. That is a dangerous time, and I know, here in Oklahoma City, I think a few weeks ago was a similar situation. I don't know the whole, behind the scenes, but I do know that the husband ran from the police. Um, Unfortunately, the woman was in a domestic abuse relationship. I don't know the degree of it, but at the end of the day, he shot her, then turned the gun on himself and into his life as well. And and oftentimes and not, and you may obviously, I'm definitely not a professional on any of the topics, and I want people, I think, I don't want people to think that Brenda is as well, but it's a subject that needs to be discussed more. And why, and you may not know the answer, and that's perfectly fine, because it's probably one of my other why questions, and in life we just don't know why at times, and I think God does that just because that's where the trust and the faith comes into play, that he knows the reasoning, and at the end of the day we know that he's in control. And why is it in some situations, maybe like the one that I mentioned a few moments ago, that even if the police was there, that because they knew what the situation was or what have you, why is it that oftentimes that we see relationships like this one that is a domestic abuse of some sort turns violent, and the fatality is there because X, Y, and Z? Why is it we always get the I shouldn't say why, that sounds horrible, but why is it that, I don't know why I keep saying, but anyway, um the reason behind the men, is it a certain thing like, I guess that's why I'm still confused on trying to get my mind wrapped around it, is the man out here, why are we just, let's say for example, he shoots his wife, it's always the victim, and then he turned a gun. Is it a control thing that he doesn't want no other guy to have her, or obviously we don't know what goes through their minds? Any reasoning behind potentially why men are, the women are trying to get out, they turn the gun, they kill their wives or girlfriends, or whoever it is, however they are related to them, if I can talk right, and then turn the gun? Is it a control issue, or we just really just don't have an answer for that?
Oh, no, I think there's people that do work on the mindset of perpetrators and abusers. I'm not the expert on that. I'm more of a person who works with bystanders,
Mhm.
and then also survivors and the dynamics of that kind of thing. But there's definitely, what I do know of perpetrators and abusers is definitely there's control, domination, grooming that goes on. A lot of times people ask, why didn't she leave? Right. Well, this stuff doesn't happen on the first date,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
you don't go on a first date with an abuser and he hits you and then you're like, oh, I should leave. Right. This is all there's a grooming process that goes on. They move the goalposts. It's a little thing. And then they move it a little further and it's more and it's more and it's more, until this person realizes, the victim realizes, I'm now taking responsibility for his behavior and this is my fault, and they've been brainwashed, and now there's financial abuse going on, right? So this person has no access to money. They are, their entire lives are being controlled. Maybe now they've been isolated from their family, their friends. There's physical threats of violence against them if they leave. So all of these things is about power and control on the perpetrator's side. I don't know the exact inner workings of them, but I know that the dynamics of the abuse, oftentimes society does not understand, and we place all this burden on the victim. Why didn't she leave?
Mhm.
um why didn't she know? Why didn't she whatever, right? And it's kind of like, why are we placing all that on the victim? Why aren't we holding the perpetrator accountable? Why are we saying, what does she do to make him do that? And why are we saying, why didn't he leave? Why didn't he stop? Why didn't he get help?
And that's a good point, and I think that's, as a system, I think that's where it needs to be fixed, and getting the right resources. It's a broken system that needs fixed, so to speak. And it's, I just think I think our biggest, and I know it's just my, just not really rambling, but just a thought that with so much social media impact and with so much just everything of how everything seems to be nowadays, I just really think we're so, like we mentioned earlier, it's so normal to everybody that really it's just like, oh, another victim, oh, another whatever, that we just act like it's
Well,
nothing.
it's victim blaming is what it comes back to. And it's disproportionately happens with victims of sexual violence, domestic violence. We also see a lot of victim blaming with people who are victims of police murder, police brutality. We're always diving into, if someone is murdered by the police, what was their history, right? Were they a drug dealer? Were they this? Were they resisting? Were they doing that? Whatever. Um, but we don't see it in other situations, right? We don't blame someone who got carjacked. Why did you get carjacked? Where were you driving your car? What were you doing? We don't blame home invasion victims, right? Did you have your windows open? Was your door unlocked?
Right.
Like, right? But we want to bring up the character and the history of people who are sexually assaulted, victims of domestic violence, and victims of police brutality. And so the victim blaming part of it, though, if we blame the victim, then no one has to do anything. As a society, we don't have to hold anyone accountable. We don't have to create any laws. We don't have to create any programs. We don't have to create policy. We don't have to do anything. Nothing. Because if that person hadn't done what they'd done, it wouldn't have happened to them. And the problem with that is that it's not the victim's fault. Again, it's the perpetrator's issue, right? But if we just victim blame, we don't have to do anything. And we just keep on going about our lives, and the violence will continue to happen and nothing will change because we've blamed the victim.
Absolutely. And it's sad. I think it's one of the, it really drives me not really insane, but it just irritates me because it's a big topic. It's a big issue that really just nobody talks about. It's just, oh, we're whatever, and we move on. We see,
right. And again, that also goes back to victim blaming, right? Because what happens is then if I behave a certain way, this won't happen to me. And that's the falsehood. That's the myth. The myth is if I am this exact type of person, I dress this way, I act this way, I hang out with these people, I do ABC, nothing bad is going to happen to me. And that's not true. Anyone can be the victim of domestic violence or sexual violence. A very, people say things like, oh, well, she's educated or this or that. She wouldn't be in that situation. Oh, anyone can find themselves in this situation. And anyone can be sexually assaulted. It does not, again, sexual violence does not discriminate. So the falsehood is if I am a certain way and I am a certain person, this is not going to happen to me. And it happened to that person because they did that, but I'm not going to do that. So it's not going to happen to me. Absolutely. And that's a dangerous myth.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest, and everything. Well, the tornado is not going to hit me, so I'm good. That's a bad analogy. I probably should have went that route, but we just play, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me type of thing. And in reality, anything and everything can happen to anyone at any given second. I mean, you can go out here and unfortunately there could be whatever taking place. And
yeah, well, if you take your porn example, right? Someone could be watching porn and be like, no, I'm a casual viewer. I'll never go down that rabbit hole like other people. And then pretty soon you find yourself down the rabbit hole.
Exactly. And it's a hard.
You didn't intend to do it. You didn't think it would happen to you, but it did.
And and sadly, it's a tough addiction to break because you get the urge of whatever. You got to go to porn. You're stressed at work. You got to take your probably unexpected quote unquote restroom break. You go, it doesn't matter. Go to your car for less. I don't care what it is. And people are glad literally nowadays we have a computer on our hand. It's a cell phone. And there's so much technology that you can literally just do whatever you really want, unfortunately, with it. And if need be, someone can, I'm not going to, but if I want to, like, oh, I'm going to go check whatever sites are out there. And it's so accessible now. It's just literally you get caught and you want the urge of more and more and more. I want more. And at the end of the day, it's going to hurt you in the end. And unfortunately, you're going to lose a lot more than you expected.
Yeah. And I think, if we just speak in terms of humanity, I wish that more of us would extend others compassion and empathy, because that's what we would want from people, right? If we found ourselves in a position that we didn't think we would find ourselves in, and we thought it couldn't happen to us, but if it does, you want people to extend compassion and empathy to you. And I wish that we would think about that and extend it to others.
Absolutely. And I know our time is winding down. Real quick, last few moments, Brenda, I appreciate your time. Ways for listeners out there to get involved. I know I'm going to definitely looking more into set the expectation, get more involved on within the organization as well, and also help promote on the podcast. And for the exception of the podcast, for just people out there listening, what are ways that people can get involved with Set the Expectation and just in ways in general?
Yeah, I would just ask you to go to settheexpectation.org. That's our website. It talks about the story of us and how we got started and how I got started. There's ways to get involved. You can go on there and look at our champions program, which is our pro athletes doing good out in the world. Different events, just kind of who we are and what we do. If you just kind of go there and click around, you'll find all kinds of good stuff. And then you can also find where to follow us on social media. And then my personal social media accounts are Brenda Tracy 24 on Twitter and Instagram.
There you have it, folks. All that information will be within the description of the podcast once it's released. Miss Tracy, thank you for coming on, sharing your story. And, I definitely learned a lot. And, I applaud you, and I continue going to be praying for you and continue to get that message across.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
You're welcome. Any plans real quick for Thanksgiving?
Oh, I just plan to just be at home and eat and watch football. That's it.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's it. Food and football. Food, family, football. That's what we're doing.
Hey, that's the American. I know this podcast is listened across the world, but that's the American tradition. I think that's one of the best ones. But happy Thanksgiving. I know we're a week away, but happy Thanksgiving, Brenda. And
thank you. You too.
Again, thank you for coming on, and stay safe out there.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Brenda Tracy, Set the Expectation, the founder. And you've been listening to the Area Tech Podcast. The episode will be dropped here soon, later on this week. But nonetheless, great evening. See you guys soon. Take care.